Sarah Martinez stood outside the courthouse steps, her hands shaking as she clutched the divorce papers.
23 years of marriage had just ended with a judge's signature.
Her husband Robert had made it clear he wanted nothing more to do with her. The woman who had stood by him through his medical school, who had raised their 2 children while he built his career, was now considered worthless in his eyes. "You've gotten fat and boring, Sarah," were his last cruel words echoing in her mind. At 45, she felt like her life was over. The house they had built together now belonged to him. Half of everything was supposed to be hers, but Robert's expensive lawyers had found ways around that. She walked away with a small settlement and a broken heart. Her children, now grown and successful, lived in different states.
Emma was a busy lawyer in New York, and Michael worked for a tech company in California.
They loved their mother, but their lives were full.
Sarah felt like a burden whenever she called them. She didn't want to complain about their father or make them choose sides.
The apartment she rented was tiny compared to their old home. It had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room that barely fit her old furniture. The neighborhood wasn't the best, but it was all she could afford with her part-time job at the local library. At night, she could hear her neighbors arguing through thin walls. During the day, she felt invisible. Depression crept in slowly, like fog rolling over hills. Sarah found herself sleeping more and eating less. She stopped calling friends because she felt ashamed of her situation. Most of her old friends were still married, still living the life she used to have. She convinced herself they wouldn't understand or that they would judge her. The library job helped a little. She worked 3 days a week, helping people find books and organizing events for children. The kids made her smile with their excitement over story time. But, when her shift ended, the loneliness returned. She would drive home to her empty apartment and wonder what the point of everything was.
Months passed in a blur of sadness.
Sarah stopped taking care of herself the way she used to. Her hair grew longer and messier. She wore the same few comfortable clothes over and over.
Looking in mirrors became something she avoided.
She felt like a ghost of the woman she used to be. One particularly bad day, Sarah sat in her car after work and cried until no more tears would come. She thought about her life and couldn't see how it would ever get better.
At 45, who would want to start over with someone like her?
She felt used up and thrown away.
Her sister Maria called that evening from Arizona.
Maria had always been the stronger one, the one who took risks and chased adventures. She had married a rancher and lived on a huge property in the desert. Their conversations had become less frequent since the divorce, partly because Sarah felt embarrassed about her situation.
"Sarah, you sound terrible," Maria said after they had talked for a few minutes. "This isn't living. You're just existing." "What am I supposed to do, Maria? Start over at 45? Who am I kidding? Come stay with us for a while. The ranch has plenty of room, and the fresh air might do you good. Carlos and I would love to have you." Sarah's first reaction was to say no.
She didn't want to be a burden on her sister's family.
She didn't want to admit that she couldn't handle life on her own.
But, as she looked around her small apartment, with its beige walls and second-hand furniture, she realized she had nothing left to lose.
"Maybe for just a week or 2, she said quietly. "Stay as long as you need. Pack your things and drive down here. It's time to remember who you are." That night, Sarah packed her clothes and a few personal items. She gave her landlord notice and arranged to have her mail forwarded.
The library manager was understanding when she explained she needed extended time off for family reasons.
Everyone could see that Sarah was struggling. The drive to Arizona took 2 days.
Sarah stopped at cheap motels and ate fast food meals alone. She wondered if she was making a mistake.
What if she was just running away from her problems instead of solving them? What if she became dependent on Maria and Carlos instead of learning to stand on her own feet?
But, as she drove further west, something began to change. The landscape opened up into wide spaces and endless sky. The cities became smaller and the traffic lighter. She rolled down her windows and felt warm, dry air on her face for the first time in months.
Maybe Maria was right about fresh air being good medicine.
The ranch was bigger than Sarah remembered from pictures. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with cattle and horses. The house itself was a beautiful adobe structure with thick walls and cool rooms. Maria met her at the front door with a huge hug and tears in her eyes.
"Look at you, sister. We're going to fix this."
Carlos welcomed her warmly and helped carry her bags to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment had been. The room had windows on two walls that looked out over pastures and mountains in the distance. Sarah sat on the bed and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. That first evening, they sat on the back porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had really looked at a sunset. City life had made her forget about simple beauties like this.
"Tomorrow, I'll show you around the property," Maria said.
"We have some new horses, and Carlos hired a new ranch hand a few months ago."
"Nice man, works hard."
Sarah nodded, but she wasn't really thinking about meeting new people. She was thinking about how quiet it was here, how the only sounds were wind in the trees and cattle in distant fields. For the first time since the divorce, she felt like she could breathe properly. She fell asleep that night to the sound of complete silence, something she had forgotten existed.
No traffic, no arguing neighbors, no sirens or city noise. Just the peaceful quiet of open country.
Maybe Maria had been right to bring her here.
Maybe this was exactly what she needed to start healing.
Sarah woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of roosters crowing in the distance. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then, she remembered the ranch, Maria's invitation, her escape from the small apartment and smaller life she had been living. She felt rested in a way she hadn't experienced in months. After dressing in jeans and a simple shirt, she found Maria in the kitchen making coffee and breakfast. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with copper pots hanging from hooks and fresh flowers on the wooden table. It smelled like bacon and fresh bread, nothing like the instant meals Sarah had been eating alone.
"Sleep well?" Maria asked, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug.
"Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted. "It's so quiet here. Wait until you see the rest of the place in daylight. Carlos is already out checking on the cattle, but he'll be back for lunch. I thought we could walk around this morning, let you get familiar with everything." They spent the morning touring the ranch. Maria showed her the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, the barn where they kept equipment and feed. Everything was well maintained and organized. Sarah could see that this was a working ranch, not just a pretty place to live. The horses particularly caught her attention. There were 6 of them in the main pasture, beautiful animals with glossy coats and intelligent eyes. Sarah had ridden a little as a child but hadn't been on a horse in decades. "That's Thunder," Maria said, pointing to a large black horse. "Carlos's favorite. And the brown mare is Stella. She's gentle as a lamb, perfect for someone getting back into riding." "I don't know if I remember how," Sarah said, but she found herself drawn to the fence. Stella wandered over and let Sarah stroke her nose. The horse's breath was warm and sweet-smelling. "It comes back to you. Like riding a bicycle, only bigger," Maria laughed. They were heading back toward the house when Sarah saw a man working near the barn. He was tall and lean, wearing jeans, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. He was fixing something on a piece of equipment, his movements confident and sure. "That must be Jake, the ranch hand Carlos mentioned," Maria said.
"Jake. Come meet my sister." The man looked up and walked toward them.
As he got closer, Sarah could see he was older than she had first thought, probably in his early 50s. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hair was dark brown with silver threads, and when he removed his hat to greet them, she noticed it was slightly too long, as if he cut it himself. "Jake Morrison," he said, extending a work-calloused hand. His voice was deep and gentle.
"You must be Sarah. Maria's been looking forward to your visit." Sarah shook his hand, surprised by how warm and steady it felt. Nice to meet you.
Jake's been with us about 4 months now, Maria explained.
Best worker we've ever had. He can fix anything and has a way with the animals. Jake's face showed a hint of embarrassment at the praise. Carlos and Maria make it easy to do good work. This is a fine place. There was something in his manner that put Sarah at ease immediately. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or make conversation for the sake of it. He seemed comfortable with himself in a way that Sarah envied. I better get back to work, Jake said, putting his hat back on. Nice meeting you, Sarah. I hope you enjoy your stay.
As he walked away, Sarah found herself watching the way he moved. There was no hurry in his steps, but every movement had purpose. He seemed like someone who belonged exactly where he was. He's a good man, Maria said quietly. Been through some hard times himself, I think, but he doesn't complain about it.
Over the next few days, Sarah settled into ranch life.
She helped Maria with cooking and household tasks, tended the garden, and collected eggs from the chickens. The physical work felt good after months of sitting around feeling sorry for herself. Her appetite returned, and she began sleeping deeply through the nights. She often saw Jake working around the ranch. He would tip his hat when their paths crossed and sometimes stop to chat about small things, the weather, how the horses were doing, whether the fence repairs were holding up. These conversations were never long or personal, but Sarah found herself looking forward to them. Jake had a way of really listening when someone spoke to him. He would look directly at the person talking, give them his full attention. Sarah realized this was something she had missed in her marriage. Robert had always been distracted, thinking about work or checking his phone even during conversations. One morning, Sarah was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard a commotion from the horse pasture. One of the younger horses had gotten tangled in some wire fencing and was panicking, making the situation worse. Jake was already there, speaking in low, calm tones to the frightened animal. Sarah watched as he slowly approached the horse, never making sudden movements, his voice steady and soothing. It took nearly 20 minutes, but eventually the horse calmed enough for Jake to carefully untangle the wire. When the animal was free, Jake spent several more minutes checking for injuries and speaking gently to settle its nerves. That was amazing, Sarah said when Jake finally led the horse back to safety. Animals know when you're trying to help them, he said simply. You just have to be patient and let them know they can trust you. Something in the way he said it made Sarah think he wasn't just talking about horses. That evening, Maria suggested that Sarah might enjoy learning to ride again. Jake could give you some lessons if you're interested. He's an excellent teacher. Sarah's first instinct was to say no. She felt self-conscious about her appearance and her lack of confidence. But Maria's encouraging smile and the memory of Jake's gentle way with the frightened horse made her reconsider. Maybe just one lesson, she said finally. The next morning, Jake had Stella saddled and ready. He spent the first hour just helping Sarah remember how to mount and dismount safely, how to hold the reins properly, how to sit in the saddle. His instructions were clear and patient, and he never made her feel foolish for being nervous. Horses are honest, he told her as she sat on Stella's back for the first time in decades. They don't care what you look like or what mistakes you've made. They just care about how you treat them in the moment. When Stella began to walk slowly around the corral, Sarah felt a rush of joy she hadn't experienced in years. The rocking motion of the horse's gait, the feeling of being up high and moving through space, the connection with this powerful but gentle animal, it all came flooding back to her. You're a natural, Jake called from where he stood in the center of the corral. Stella likes you. After the lesson, as Jake helped her dismount, Sarah realized she was smiling widely for the first time in months. Her cheeks actually hurt from using muscles that had been dormant during her depression. Same time tomorrow? Jake asked. If you don't mind, Sarah replied. It's my pleasure. Stella needs the exercise anyway. As Sarah walked back to the house, she felt something stirring inside her that she thought had died during the divorce proceedings. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was the possibility of hope. Maybe Maria had been right about fresh air and open spaces. Maybe there was more life left in her than she had thought. Weeks turned into a month, and Sarah found herself genuinely happy for the first time since her divorce. The writing lessons with Jake had become the highlight of her days. She was now comfortable enough on Stella to ride around the entire property, exploring trails that wound through hills and crossed small streams. Jake often rode alongside her on Thunder, pointing out wildlife and sharing stories about the land. He knew where the best wildflowers grew, which rocks provided the perfect spots for watching sunsets, and where to find the clearest water for the horses to drink. His knowledge came from years of working outdoors and paying attention to the natural world. During these rides, Sarah learned small details about Jake's life. He had grown up on a ranch in Montana, worked cattle drives as a young man, and spent years moving from place to place before settling here. He never mentioned a family or explained why he lived alone in the small cabin on the far edge of the property. Sarah didn't push for information, sensing that Jake was a private person who shared things in his own time. One afternoon, they were riding back from a longer trail when Sarah's horse suddenly shied at something in the brush. Sarah managed to stay in the saddle, but just barely. Her heart was pounding as Jake quickly dismounted and checked on both her and Stella. "You handled that well," he said, his hands gentle as he examined Stella's legs for any injury. "Most people would have come right off." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted, still shaking slightly. "Being scared doesn't matter. What matters is that you stayed calm and didn't panic. That takes real courage." The way he looked at her when he said this made Sarah's chest feel warm. Jake wasn't just being polite, he genuinely respected how she had handled the situation. When was the last time someone had praised her courage? Robert had always criticized her fears and called her weak when she worried about things. That evening, Maria made a special dinner to celebrate Sarah's progress with writing. Carlos opened a bottle of wine he had been saving, and they sat on the porch talking and laughing as stars appeared in the clear sky. Jake had been invited to join them, though Sarah could tell he felt a bit awkward being included in family time. "Sarah's become quite the cowgirl," Carlos said, raising his glass. "Jake tells me she's ready for some of the more challenging trails." "I don't know about that," Sarah laughed, but she felt proud of how far she had come. "Don't sell yourself short," Jake said quietly. "You've got natural balance and good instincts. Stella trusts you completely now." Later, when Maria and Carlos had gone inside, Sarah and Jake remained on the porch talking. The conversation drifted from horses to books to places they had traveled. Sarah discovered that Jake was much more well-read than she had expected. He talked about novels he had enjoyed and philosophy books that had influenced his thinking. "I always carry a book in my saddlebags," he explained when Sarah expressed surprise. "Long days working alone give you plenty of time to think, and good books give you better things to think about." "What are you reading now?" Jake looked almost embarrassed. "Poetry, actually. Mary Oliver. Carlos's wife loaned it to me." "I love her work," Sarah said. "She writes about finding meaning in simple moments, about paying attention to the natural world." "That's exactly why I like it. She notices things most people miss." They talked about favorite poems and authors until the night air became cool enough that Sarah began shivering in her light sweater. Jake noticed immediately. "You should get inside before you catch cold," he said, standing to leave. "I enjoyed this," Sarah said. "The conversation, I mean. It's been a long time since I talked to someone who really listened." Jake paused at the porch steps. "I've enjoyed it too. You have interesting thoughts about things." After he left, Sarah sat alone for a few more minutes, thinking about the evening. She realized she had been genuinely herself during their conversation, not trying to impress anyone or be someone she wasn't. With Robert, she had always felt like she needed to prove her intelligence or justify her opinions. With Jake, she could simply speak her mind and know she would be heard. The next morning brought unexpected drama. One of the neighboring ranchers called to report that some of their cattle had broken through a fence and were wandering loose on the road. Carlos and Jake needed to round them up quickly before someone got hurt or the animals wandered too far. Sarah watched from the porch as they saddled horses and gathered ropes and equipment. The work looked dangerous, chasing panicked cattle in open country while trying to guide them back to safety. She found herself particularly worried about Jake, though she tried not to analyze why his safety mattered so much to her. They were gone for most of the day. Sarah helped Maria with household tasks but found herself constantly looking toward the horizon, watching for their return. When she finally saw two riders approaching the house in the late afternoon, she felt relief flood through her body. Both men were dusty and exhausted, but they were smiling. The cattle roundup had been successful, and no one had been hurt. Carlos headed straight for the shower, but Jake lingered to tend to the horses and check their equipment. Sarah brought him a cold drink and some sandwiches Maria had prepared.
"Thank you," he said gratefully. "It's been a long day." "Were you scared out there?" Sarah asked.
"It looked dangerous from here."
Jake considered the question seriously. There are always risks working with animals and open country.
But fear is just information. It tells you to be careful and pay attention. The trick is not to let it stop you from doing what needs to be done.
Sarah nodded, thinking about how this philosophy might apply to other areas of life.
Since her divorce, fear had been controlling most of her decisions. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being rejected, fear of not being good enough. Maybe Jake was right that fear was just information, not a reason to stop living.
That weekend, a neighboring family invited everyone to a barbecue and dance.
Sarah's initial reaction was to stay home. She felt out of practice with social situations and worried about meeting new people.
But Maria wouldn't hear of it.
"You need to get out and socialize," Maria said firmly.
"And you look beautiful. That new dress shows off how much healthier you're looking."
It was true that Sarah had been taking better care of herself. The outdoor work and regular meals had given her more energy. She had been wearing clothes that fit properly instead of hiding in oversized sweaters. Even her hair looked better after Maria had convinced her to try a new, shorter style. Jake offered to drive her to the party since Maria and Carlos were going separately to help with preparations. Sarah felt nervous sitting next to him in the truck, hyper-aware of his presence in the small space. He was wearing clean jeans and a white button-down shirt that made his weathered face look handsome in the evening light. The party was larger than Sarah had expected, with people from several neighboring ranches gathered in the host family's backyard. There was live music from a local country band, long tables loaded with food, and a wooden dance floor set up under string lights.
Sarah knew almost no one there and felt overwhelmed at first.
But the people were friendly and welcoming, and several women made efforts to include her in conversations. She found herself talking easily about ranch life and her riding lessons, surprised to discover she had interesting stories to tell. When the band started playing slower songs, couples began dancing. Sarah watched from her seat at a picnic table, remembering when she used to love dancing. Robert had always complained that dancing was silly and refused to join her on the rare occasions when they attended events with music.
"Would you like to dance?"
Sarah looked up to find Jake standing beside her table, his hand extended. Her first impulse was to refuse. She felt rusty and self-conscious. But something in his patient, kind expression made her change her mind. "I might step on your feet," she warned as she took his hand. "I'll take my chances." Jake was a surprisingly good dancer, leading with confidence but never making her feel clumsy when she missed a step. Being held in his arms felt natural and right in a way that surprised her. She could smell his aftershave and feel the warmth of his hand on her back. For the first time in years, she felt feminine and graceful. "You're not stepping on my feet," he said as they swayed to a slow ballad. "The night is young," Sarah replied, making him smile. When the song ended, they stayed on the dance floor for another, then another. Other people complimented them on how well they danced together. Sarah felt a glow of happiness that had nothing to do with the wine she had been drinking. On the drive home, they talked about the party and the people they had met. The conversation felt easy and natural, like they had been friends for years instead of weeks. When Jake walked her to the front door of the ranch house, Sarah turned to thank him for a wonderful evening. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I hope this doesn't sound forward, but I really enjoyed spending time with you tonight. You're special." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the cheek. The kiss was soft and brief, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Good night," he whispered, and walked away into the darkness. Sarah stood on the porch for several minutes, touching her cheek where he had kissed her. For the first time since her divorce, she felt desired and attractive. More importantly, she felt like she might be falling in love. The morning after the dance, Sarah woke with butterflies in her stomach. She replayed every moment of the evening, the way Jake had asked her to dance, how natural it felt to be in his arms, the gentle kiss goodnight. Part of her was excited by these new feelings, but another part was terrified. What if she was reading too much into his kindness? What if he was just being polite to his employer's sister-in-law? She dressed carefully and went to the kitchen, hoping to seem casual when Jake inevitably appeared for his morning coffee. But Carlos told her that Jake had left early to check on some fence repairs in the far pasture and probably wouldn't be back until evening. "Did something happen between you two last night?" Maria asked with a knowing smile after Carlos left. "You look like a teenager with a crush." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "We danced a few times. He was very nice. And he kissed me goodnight." On the cheek, Sarah added quickly, as if that made it less significant. Maria clapped her hands together. "I knew it. I could see the way he looks at you during those writing lessons. That man is smitten. Don't get carried away. He was probably just being polite." "Sarah Martinez, you are the most stubborn woman I know. Jake Morrison is not the type of man who kisses women just to be polite. He's interested in you, and it's about time you let yourself be interested in someone too." But, as the day wore on without seeing Jake, Sarah's insecurities crept back in. What did she really know about him? Why was he working on someone else's ranch instead of having his own place? Had there been a wife somewhere who had left him like Robert left her? Maybe he was just lonely and she happened to be available. By evening, she had almost convinced herself that the previous night had meant nothing. Then, Jake appeared at the back door, hat in hand, looking almost nervous. "I was wondering if you'd like to take a ride before dark," he said. "There's something I'd like to show you." Sarah's heart jumped. "Let me grab my boots." They rode in comfortable silence toward the western edge of the property, where rocky hills created natural formations and small canyons. Jake led her up a trail she hadn't seen before, winding between boulders and scrub brush until they reached a flat area that overlooked the entire valley. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Jake said as they dismounted. "I come here when I need to think." The view was spectacular. The sun was beginning to set, painting the landscape in gold and purple. From this height, they could see for miles in every direction other ranches, small towns, mountain ranges in the distance. The everyday problems of life seemed very small from up here. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "I thought you'd like it." Jake was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about last night, about us, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea about my situation." Sarah's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The explanation of why nothing could happen between them. "I know you're going through a difficult time after your divorce," Jake continued. "I don't want to take advantage of that or make things more complicated for you." "You're not taking advantage of anything," Sarah said quickly. "There are things about me you don't know. I haven't been completely honest about my past." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What kind of things?" Jake sat down on a large boulder and gestured for her to join him. "I was married once. Her name was Linda, and I loved her more than life itself. We had a small ranch in Montana, nothing fancy, but it was ours." Sarah sat beside him, sensing this was a story he rarely told. "Linda got sick when she was 38. Cancer. We fought it for 2 years, spent every penny we had on treatments and specialists. In the end, nothing worked." His voice was quiet but steady. "She died 6 years ago." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, reaching out to touch his arm. "After she died, I couldn't stay on the ranch.
Everything there reminded me of her.
I sold the place and started moving around, taking jobs wherever I could find them.
I'd been running from grief for 6 years, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Sarah waited, sensing there was more.
When I took this job with Carlos and Maria, I planned to stay maybe 6 months and move on like always.
But something about this place felt different.
And then you arrived, and for the first time since Linda died, I started thinking about maybe staying put.
What are you telling me, Jake?
He turned to look directly at her.
I'm telling you that I care about you more than I expected to care about anyone again. But I'm also telling you that I'm damaged goods.
I spent 6 years avoiding real connections with people because it hurt too much to lose Linda. I don't know if I'm capable of loving someone the way they deserve to be loved. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes.
Don't you think I'm damaged too? My husband of 23 years threw me away like garbage.
He told me I was fat and boring and worthless.
I came here feeling like my life was over.
You're nothing like worthless, Jake said fiercely.
You're intelligent and kind and beautiful. Any man who couldn't see that is a fool. Then, why are you trying to push me away?
Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening landscape.
Because I'm scared. Because caring about you means risking being hurt again.
Because you deserve better than someone who's spent 6 years running from his problems. Sarah stood up and walked a few steps away, her mind racing. She understood his fear because she felt it too. Opening your heart after it's been broken takes enormous courage. But she also understood something else, that hiding from love wasn't really living. Jake, look at me, she said, turning back to face him. He stood and met her eyes.
I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. These past weeks have been the happiest I've been in years.
You make me feel like myself again, like someone worth caring about.
You are worth caring about, he said, stepping closer.
Then, stop trying to protect me from my own choices.
I'm not asking you to promise forever. I'm just asking you to give this a chance.
Jake searched her face in the fading light.
What if I hurt you? What if I can't be what you need? What if you can? What if we both can? We'll never know unless we try.
For a moment, they stood looking at each other in the gathering dusk. Then, Jake stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands.
I want to try, he said softly. I want to try being brave enough to love you.
When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the gentle peck on the cheek from the night before. This was a real kiss, tender but passionate, full of longing and hope. Sarah felt herself melting into his arms, all her fears dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. 6 months later, Sarah and Jake were married in a simple ceremony on the ranch, surrounded by family and the friends they had made in the community. Sarah wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers that Jake had picked for her that morning. Maria cried through the entire service, and Carlos gave a toast about second chances and the courage to grab happiness when it finds you. Sarah had never returned to her old city. She and Jake built a small house on a piece of land Carlos sold them at the edge of the ranch. They raised horses and cattle, tended a large garden, and created a life together based on simple pleasures and deep contentment. The fears they had both carried about being hurt again, about not being enough for someone else, never completely disappeared. But they learned that love isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to be brave despite being afraid. They learned that two broken people can heal each other if they're willing to be patient and gentle and honest about their scars. Sarah's children visited often and grew to love Jake like a father. They said their mother seemed like a completely different person, confident, happy, at peace with herself. Even her ex-husband Robert, when he met Jake at Emma's college graduation, admitted privately to their son that Sarah seemed better off without him. On quiet evenings, Sarah and Jake often rode their horses up to the rocky overlook where they had first been honest about their feelings. They would sit and watch the sunset, talking about their day, making plans for tomorrow, grateful for the chance to love and be loved again. Sarah learned that being rejected and alone had not been the end of her story, it had been the beginning of a new chapter.
Sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the way for the best things we never saw coming. Sometimes a cowboy's love really can save us, but only if we're brave enough to save ourselves first.